an honor to be here today, to share because for me, I was not here when Kanna left us. I have not been to the family since then. So that somehow the sadness of Kanna's going comes back to one, because one had not been part of the processes of healing at all since we had been far away. And yet it is, on the one hand, a sad occasion, but on the other hand, as K.G.Kannabiran pointed out, it can be a very positive occasion. And let us hope that we can make this occasion as positive as we can, and we can make our own lives as positive as we can, and we can make the contributions, even if each of us in the next 10 years can make 20% of the contribution that Kanna made to various aspects of our society, which we will deal with, I think that we would have done extremely well. Very difficult to step into his shoes completely and utterly, and therefore I am setting us very modest targets. Let us try and be at least 20% of Kanna, which might also be difficult, but if we can all achieve that result, that is the way, and that is the best way, I would say, that we will be able to remember him, that we will be able to give credit to him, that we will be able to honor him, and the way in which we will make absolutely certain that not only Kanna's memory, but his values and what he stood for both live on and become stronger. This is what Kanna would want, and that is the first message I would like to give us, that the memorial ceremony is just wonderful. There's nothing wrong with it. Let us keep having them, but let us use them to make ourselves stronger for the work which still has to be done, and for the work which Kanna has taught us has to be done, and why. I want to say first that although Kanna was a consummate lawyer, and indeed he was a consummate lawyer, he was a human being first. He was a fighter for justice and fairness second, and a lawyer only third. And I think we have a great deal to learn from that, because too many of us become efficient lawyers first, and when we become efficient lawyers, interested only in the technical issues of life itself, we become, without knowing it, just a little arrogant. We begin to, and we must begin to be aware of these things, because what we then begin to do is to devalue other things, devalue values, devalue humanity. So I'll deal with the fact that he was a consummate lawyer in a moment, because that too had some very important characteristics. But now I want to emphasize that he was a human being first, and that he will remain, as always, a human being first. And that is important. Let us not forget our humanity, and let us never forget Kanna's humanity. But that humanity had a particular quality about it. The quality of fairness was very different. You see, what most lawyers did as lawyers, and now to talk about Kanna as a lawyer and as a human being lawyer, that most people distinguished between cases. Most lawyers do the cases which benefit them most. In other words, they make an evaluation. Will this case help? Will this case be good for me? Will the other case be good for me? But Kanna was very comfortable with doing the cases where he was needed, doing the cases which other people were embarrassed to do, doing the cases which other people were scared to do, doing the cases which many lawyers ought to have done. And in that sense, doing these cases required a great deal of courage. But for Kanna, that courage came naturally. So I want to say to all of us here who are lawyers and who do everything else, let us be courageous. Let us not only do those things which are fashionable. Let us not simply say those things that are fashionable. Let us be human about what we do, and let us do things appropriately and properly. Handling a case which is difficult to handle, in relation to which the public will look down on you, is a very serious thing. And Kanna did it completely. And I'm not only talking about high-level political cases. He taught me a very important lesson once, which I have never forgotten. He was telling me about a prostitute who had been charged with rape that he was defending. Many of us, I think even I, before I met Kanna, would have been a little bit dubious about representing a prostitute who had been charged with rape. He was telling me about it, and he made the following point to me in very strong terms, but simply, as only Kanna would put it. And I have used that expression since from time to time, and that is that even a prostitute has the right to say no. So, for many of us, we stand on our high moral ground and we start judging people. We start judging people. We start judging people for their morality. We start judging prostitutes for being prostitutes, and so on and so on. And yet for Kanna, it was not the clothes the person wore. It was not how they looked. It was not what they said. It was not how brilliant they were, but it was their humanity. And for him, even a prostitute was a human being deserving of his legal services in circumstances where most lawyers would say no. And he understood, as I hope all of us will understand as time goes on, that terrorists are not terrorists for nothing. That the terrorists of today, so-called, can be the leaders of tomorrow. He understood that much violence is the result of injustice in our society. And that dealing with that violence unjustly increases the injustice in our society. And as I understood him, he represented people who were alleged to have been guilty of all kinds of heinous conduct, not necessarily because he supported them completely, but because he had a very deep understanding that they had grievances and they had difficulties and they had choices to make as human beings which left them no choice but to do what they were doing. And that level of understanding is very clear, and we need to develop that understanding ourselves. And therefore, to treat people like that unjustly because they had been engaged in violence, Kanna would tell us, increases the injustice in our society and makes our society less just. So in a sense, in appearing for those causes, what was Kanna doing? He was preventing our society from degenerating into injustice. What he was doing, in a sense, was protecting all those in society who were against the fact that he was doing this work. He was protecting them in a very interesting way. Because you know, if Kanna didn't do that work to ensure that justice survived, what happens is that today there's injustice at one level. You let that slip and you justify that somewhat, and then you get injustice at another level. You're a little bit frightened and then finally, we who think we will never become the butt of injustice. You leave the state and its organs to do exactly what they want to do, and ultimately, those who support them today will be the victims tomorrow. The only way, Kanna believed, to guarantee a just society for all of us, for each and every one of us, for all of us who today think we won't get into trouble, is to fight injustice when other people are faced with it. That is the only way in which you can make a contribution. So those people who are in the middle class and upper classes don't know it. But Kanna was fighting for them, for their children, and for their grandchildren when he was engaged in the kind of work in which he was engaged. Kanna wanted society to change. And he was not theoretical about it. He had a good theoretical approach. His practice was certainly grounded in theory. But you never heard him being over-theoretical about anything. Because for him, theory was worthwhile only if it led to good practice. Theory for its own sake was utterly and absolutely useless. So that he was a very practical man in many ways. But practicality does not mean accepting your lot, as many people believe. You know, many of us become accustomed to the pain of others and to the poverty of others, and slowly we begin to put it out of our minds, pretend that it doesn't exist, even if we go to a party sometimes or something like that. But for Kanna, that awareness and pain of the suffering, of human suffering, was always large, was always there, was always thought about and talked about. But the important thing to note is that he didn't hold it up as a shield in front of him. It didn't shine out of him that sort of human suffering awareness. He didn't make a big thing of it, as many of us do sometimes. It came naturally to him, and it was always there. You could actually sense that pain, and yet he could be as happy as he would have wanted to be. You know, to reach the position where one is liberated in a sexist sense, to reach the stage where one truly thinks of women, and I think this is the point Vasant was making, when one truly thinks that women are really equal to men, and they're not there to be trampled upon and exploited and oppressed and so on. And you see that in the normal life. And I think that I found the lesson of equality between the sexes, that transformation, more difficult than racial equality. It was a very difficult stage to reach. And I think that many men in this room will find that a difficult thing to reach, because you see, by the time you get to your own house and your wife is there and so on, the story is a little bit different. So it's very nice to talk about women's equality and so on. It's easier to talk about it than to live it. And I want to say that Kanna truly lived it. Kanna truly lived equality. He truly believed that women were equal. And one of the lessons we want to learn is to fight for the equality of women, to be a very useful thing. You know, one wonders why there are so many offenses in relation to children in this country and in the world. And my thesis about that, and I would hope Kanna would agree with me, that the cause of these sorts of problems that children have in society is the result of the exploitation and oppression of women. That is the root cause in some ways. And if all of us men, in the name of Kanna and in Kanna's memory, consciously, absolutely stopped thinking of women as objects in our society, as sexual objects in our society, as people to be trampled upon, oppressed and exploited, and we stop thinking about it, particularly in our personal lives, we would make a very, very important contribution. And then the other thing Kanna was against completely was the law of the jungle as it operates in our society. The strong pitted against the weak, the powerful pitted against the powerless, the rich pitted against the poor. He understood that and was against it totally, and negated this law of the jungle completely and absolutely. And he would have cared for vulnerability. He would have understood that vulnerable people in our society need help and assistance and care. But the important thing is that Kanna would not have thought this as an act of charity. He would not have thought that we were looking at vulnerable people for their own sakes, for their sakes, because he feels sorry for them or anything of the kind. He would not consider this an act of charity. Kanna would be helping and would care for vulnerable people and would want to create the situation where vulnerable people were empowered and were able to manage their own lives appropriately and were looked after and defended properly all the time. Because he would have said to you, I'm not doing it for their sake, he would have said. I'm doing it for my sake, he would have said. Because you see, I don't want to live in a society where all these things happen. I don't want my children, my grandchildren, after I die even, to live in that kind of society. And therefore he would have made the proposition that we are doing the work we do for our own sakes. And that is where the modesty truly came from. And then many of us overemphasize the value of freedom in our society. And we tend to underemphasize the value of equality. Many of us tend to think that freedom and opportunity is the only route to go, and that thereafter everything looks after itself. Many of us think that poor people are poor because they are lazy. And I think that we must stop thinking that and try and convert society into a different way of thinking if we are to ensure that we remember Kanna, and if we are to make sure that Kanna is properly remembered. We have to create a different society of values, a society in which people don't trample over each other, a society in which we understand that people are not poor because they are lazy. They are poor because of the structures of our society, because society is structured in a way which makes them poor. And therefore there are only two options. One option is for society to be restructured so that there are no poor people, and Kanna would have no difficulty with that notion. But he would not say, let us wait until the structures of society change. He would say the second thing too, that in the meantime, because the structure of society gives rise to poverty, it is those who benefit from that structure that must make sure that they deal with the consequences of the structure of society, because people can't get rich from the way in which society is structured and ignore wholly and completely poverty, which is the consequence of that structure. And I think that Kanna would have said that very clearly and openly, that poverty is the result of structure. Many of the problems in our society is the result of structure, and that we need to make sure that structures continue to change, and we need to make our contribution towards those structures in a very meaningful way. So I've been talking, my topic was Kanna and beyond. And I think that we have talked about Kanna, we shall talk about Kanna, but our lives beyond Kanna have got to be motivated by values. A spirit of self-sacrifice, a spirit of understanding, and a spirit of impatience. I forgot to say that. He felt for poor people so badly that he was really impatient with society, and really impatient about the fact that change would come. And one can say he was an impatient old man on the one hand. On the other hand, one can say, and that's what I do say, that that impatience was born of a true feeling for those who were vulnerable and for those who suffered in society every day. So let us make an important contribution to changing our society, not in an irresponsible way, but in a careful, organized, as Kanna would be, careful, organized, planned, strategic, and careful way. Reassert ourselves and rededicate ourselves towards ushering in and growing a social movement which will give rise to the kind of society, to the kind of humanity, to the kind of lawyering, to the kind of feeling for which Kanna stood. Thank you very much.